Good morning, everyone. I hope you're doing really well. So, why are we starting today with Greek music? First of all, I'd like to say that today's lesson about Greek music is really meant to be an informative introduction to you to see where music starts. It's not a lecture that you have to focus on taking notes for. If you want to take a few just for your own peace of mind and memory, that's fine. But most of today, I just want to get you used to the format of the recorded lectures and give you an idea of how we started and where we started. So, why Greek music? Author Joshua Mark wrote this. Ancient Greece is the birthplace of Western philosophy, mathematics, history, drama, the Olympic Games, and democracy. I would go further to say that it is also the birthplace of astronomy and physics, the alphabet, and of course, music. So today we'll explore a bit about the Greeks and their culture and ideas, and how their ideas about music in particular, but other things as well, have influenced our Western society. So in the beginning, we can think about the Greek culture encompassing about three different periods. The first one, the Archaic period, goes from about 800 BC or BCE to 500 BC. The Classical period runs from about 480 BC to 320 BC. The dates for the Classical period are because 480 was a major battle was won by the Greeks, and then 323 was the death of Alexander the Great. Following that, we have the Hellenistic age that goes from about 323 down to 31 BC. This overlaps with the takeover of the Roman Empire, but because the Romans assimilated so much of the Greek ideals into their own culture and just Romanized it, then we kind of include that whole time period for about the last century or two to be included with the Greeks, even though it was technically under Roman rule.
The high point of Greek culture came in about the 4th century BC with Alexander the Great's Greek Empire expansion. It encompassed much of North Africa, Lower Italy, modern Greece, and into Persia. You can get a feeling of where the empire expanded to by looking at the more modern map. Take note of the seas, the Black Sea, the Caspian Sea, the Mediterranean Sea, and the Red Sea. And then you can get an idea of how large this empire was. The empire was organized into small city-states, cities and the surrounding countryside, which was very mountainous land, each having its own government. In general, people lived in houses that were made of mud bricks covered in plaster with pottery-tiled roofs. There was simple, modest furniture that included wooden chests, dressers, couches, and other such small furniture. Although there were carpets, most of the carpets were for couch covers and drapes rather than actually on the floor. The work included mostly farming. As you can see in the picture, you can see the farmland is outside of the boundaries of the city. However, farmland was hard to come by, so often fishing or trade was an alternative lifestyle. People wore simple dress, light tunics, hats to protect them from the sun, and they went barefoot frequently. Many wore light white lead paint on their faces. As described in Clinics in Dermatology, a journal that was quoted in the NBC News article, they wore white lead on their faces to clear their complexions and improve the color and the texture of the skin. Unfortunately, it rather had detrimental effects as lead was poisonous. Families had pets, games for the children, and they ate bread and olive oil, fruit, nuts, and vegetables. There was not much meat unless they were wealthy. They ate separately, the men and the women separately, in their homes, because only the poor and the slaves ate in public. The city-states included temples and libraries, indoor theaters, public baths, and aqueducts to the village water fountain. The water fountain contained the water that the slaves carried from there to the wealthy homes. Now, slaves made up a very large portion of the population. For example, slaves made up about a fourth of the population of Athens. Slaves were frequently prisoners from wars overseas or foreigners purchased in the slave trade after having been captured by pirates. In Sparta, the babies that were deemed unhealthy were often kept alive as slaves or simply abandoned. According to Ducksters.com, an educational site, they say it was sometimes difficult to tell a slave from a free person in ancient Greece. Slave women often had their hair cut short. This would have marked them as a slave because free women kept their hair long. Sometimes slaves were marked with scars or tattoos so they could be recognized as slaves. Other than carrying water, slaves would work in mines, the worst because their lifespan was very short, or on farms. But some also worked as artisans making pottery or shoes or leather in the city or in households. Some were teachers, barbers, tended to horses, or took care of the children. Their jobs would be different depending on whether the slaves were men or women. The culture that evolved by about 600 BC, with a high point in the 4th century BC, was spread by Alexander the Great, who lived from 356 to 323 BC. The Greeks had state-supported education. In fact, they focused highly on education and theater. There were some democratic areas, especially in Athens, although Sparta was a militaristic society ruled by an oligarchy. There was a focus throughout the empire on industry and commerce. Their exports included metal and pottery, olive oil and wine, and their imports grain, fish, wood, textiles, and slaves. They had a very, very strong shipping industry and a very good monetary system. The arts were also very important. Architecture included columns, as you can see here. There was also a lot of painting, vase painting, panels, walls, and sculpture. Science, most famously Pythagoras in around 500 BC, science was also a very important concept. Pythagoras was credited with discovering the laws of geometry, physics, and, of course, music. Music was everywhere in Greek society. We have this knowledge from writings and drawings and coins and statues and pottery. In the Greek society, there were 3 main instruments. The first was the lyre, a harp-like instrument. The second was the kithara, a larger sort of lyre. And the third main instrument was the aulos, a type of double reed instrument. And you can see they are sometimes single and sometimes double. The Greeks also had one of the first keyboards called the hydraulis, which is sort of an organ keyboard type instrument. Even our word music came from the Greeks, from the 9 muses, who were the sister goddesses, daughters of Zeus, who presided over the arts and sciences. The arts and sciences were put together because music was inseparable from dance, arithmetic, poetry, and astronomy. All were connected by music. In fact, you've heard of the music of the celestial spheres. The arts and the sciences were wrapped up together. Numbers were the key to the spiritual world. Author Albert Shea said, "Music is number made audible." Music is governed by numbers and systems and intervals. In fact, music, astronomy, and the universe are guided and ruled by the same mathematical laws. And this is what Pythagoras discovered.
There's a wonderful story of Pythagoras where he was walking along the street and he walked past a blacksmith forge and he heard the sound of hammers banging on anvils. They were creating not only sounds on themselves, but intervals that he noticed. He thought that the intervals might have to do with the weight of the anvils. So he went and investigated further. Now we're going to convert the weight measures of the Greeks to our own pounds, and I'll show you what he discovered. When he went to the shop, he found out that there were 4 different weights of anvils. The first one was 12 pounds. The second one was 9 pounds. Then there was an 8-pound hammer and a 6-pound hammer. What he discovered was that when the 12-pound hammer was hit with the 6-pound hammer, or alongside the 6-pound hammer, it created a perfect octave. What he realized was 12 pounds to 6 pounds reduced was 2 to 1, so a 2 to 1 ratio, where the smaller hammer, the 6-pound hammer, vibrated twice as fast and sounded therefore an octave above the 12-pound hammer. When the 12-pound hammer was hit alongside the 8-pound hammer, or the 9-pound hammer was alongside the 6-pound hammer, we get a 12 to 8, or in this case a 9 to 6 ratio, both of which can be reduced to 3 to 2, which created a perfect fifth. When the 12-pound hammer was hit with the 9-pound hammer, and the 8-pound hammer was hit with the 6-pound hammer, we have a 12 to 9 or 8 to 6 ratio, both of which reduce now to 4 to 3 ratio. This 4 to 3 ratio sounded like a perfect fourth. Now it's all fine and good that I tell you about this, but let's see about figuring it out with something a little bit more obvious. So here we have a guitar, obviously, and I've tuned the last two strings to the same pitch. What we discover is that the length of the string runs from here to here. So this is our given length of the string. If I take this string on the end and I take the length, and I divide it into half, and I pluck that, we get an octave. Okay? So if you can think about it this way, we have half of the string vibrating. So the whole string is 2 over 2, right? Two halves is a whole. This is 1 over 2. And what we have is a ratio then of 2 to 1. 2 to 1 ratio giving us a perfect octave. Let's go the other way, which we talked about the 3 to 2 ratio. Taking the same string, if I think about this divided into 3 parts, and I push down the string here at a third approximately, that leaves 2/3 to vibrate. And if I flip them together, we hear a perfect fifth. So that's 3/3 to 2/3 vibrating, giving us a 3 to 2 ratio, perfect fifth. Now let's take the same string, and this time think of where we divide it in half, and I'm going to divide it in half again and cover this. So we have, basically, you can imagine 4 parts to the string. Put it together, we have a perfect fourth. That is because we have 3/4 of the string vibrating against 4/4, or a whole string here. So that's 4 to 3. 4 to 3 ratio gives us our perfect fourth. So that is how Pythagoras sort of figured out the intervals and the ratios of different intervals. And those intervals are the simplest, the 2 to 1 ratio, the 3 to 2 ratio, and the 4 to 3 ratio, giving us our 3 perfect intervals today.
Music came in association with certain functions. It was in association with religious rituals, mystic ceremonies, or festivals like the Olympics or the Panhellenic Games. In fact, the first prize for the Kithara singers, according to David C. Young, and adjusted for today's inflation, would have been about $194,337.70. Not bad for one performance. But most of all, music was important because of how it could affect people and nature. Music could heal the sick. It could change behavior. Music was written in modes similar in name to what we know today, but slightly different. For example, the Dorian mode was like our Phrygian mode, and the Greek Phrygian mode was like our Dorian mode. Miracles were attributed to musician gods such as Orpheus and Apollo. Orpheus could soothe and charm the gods with his music. There were 2 cults that were associated with gods and music. The Apollonian cult, following Apollo, god of light, the sun, repentance, and agriculture, was represented by the lyre. The Apollonian cult focused on clarity of form, purity, and objectivity, very similar to our classical style today. And Dionysus, who was the god of fertility and wine, had the Dionysian cult, represented by the aulos. This cult was a cult of ecstasy, passion, sensuality, and subjectivity, very similar to our romantic style today. Music could intensify the meaning of the words, and so frequently music was incorporated into plays. One such play was Orestes by Euripides. This play was based on the family of Orestes, the son of a warrior king, Agamemnon. The family was destroyed after the Trojan battle, which had ended in a Greek victory. Orestes' mother, Clytemnestra, murdered Agamemnon, and in turn Orestes murdered his mother. The chorus in the drama during the play commented on the situation and desired forgiveness for Orestes. This chorus was called the Stasimon chorus. It was a stationary chorus because the chorus was there to comment on action and the characters. This piece of music, called the Stasimon chorus, is the oldest fragment of music found in 1892, and it dates back to 408 BC. The chorus, as I said, occurs as Orestes wakes up and comments on the fact that he is feeling tortured, that he's murdered his mother, and he knows this will lead to his death as well as the death of his loyal sister. What vengeful demon thus with footsteps dread, trampling the blood-polluted ground, sternly cruel joys to spread, horror, rage, and madness round? Woe, woe is me, in man's frail state, nor height nor greatness firm abides. At this point, pause the video and listen to the link below. Note the intensity of feeling and what instrument is used. Percussion, but the aulos as well. Music was also used in dances and symposiums. Symposiums were social gatherings of adult males. They had couches along the walls of the host's home, and during the symposium there were debates and riddles and poems and discussions. There was music and dancing and wine, all controlled by the host, and food. There were also courtesans, who were women who were there as sort of high-class prostitutes. One of the earliest pieces as well came from the 1st century AD or CE, and this is during actually the early Roman Empire. And this is a piece by Sikelos. It was found on an epitaph, or that is his tombstone. On the tombstone is written, "I am a portrait in stone. I was put here by Sikelos, where I remain forever, the symbol of timeless remembrance." The piece is called a scholion being a song sung by invited guests at a banquet or symposium. It was discovered in Turkey and was probably for Sikelos' wife, Euterpe. Here's the tombstone, dating back to the 1st century AD. And you can see on it the writing. There are letters and symbols that are representing the letters and symbols of notes and rhythms. You can see the composition on the tombstone. Here it is a little bit clearer. So the words are in the large writing, and then the small letters and symbols indicate the pitches and the rhythms, or the lengths of the notes. Here is the song of Sikelos to Euterpe. "As long as you live, shine. Grieve you not at all. Life is short, and time will claim its toll." So pause the video and listen to the song of Sikelos. It's really beautiful.
After a long reign from the 8th century BC all the way down to about the 3rd century BC, their problems arose with the Greek Empire. The area was hard to govern, it was very mountainous, it was very diverse, and each of the city-states, as we talked about before, had their own government. There were conflicts between the city-states. There was competition between the city-states. You've probably heard of the competitions between Athens and Sparta, for example. The wars that were occurring were not only between their own city-states, but wars also with neighboring territories, and especially strong ones like Rome. There was class conflict, and people became more interested in luxury and in entertainment than in keeping their territory safe from enemies. Rome had, by about the 2nd century BC, begun through a series of wars from 264 BC down to 148 BC, already assimilated a lot of the Greek culture, and they subjugated the Greeks, and they took their information and their culture and assimilated it or Romanized it. So the Romans took the ideas of the Greeks of coins, of weights and measures, of the alphabet, of religion, and as I said, assimilated it into their own culture. And thus begins the large reign of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire extended in its high point from about the northern coast of Africa to Asia along the Mediterranean Sea, through most of Europe to France and Spain and even England, part of England at the end. So the Greeks, through the Romans, influenced really a very large territory with their ideas and their concepts. But one of the most interesting things about the Roman Empire, and especially regarding art, occurs about 40 years before the birth of Christ, during the rule of Octavius, or as when he was emperor, known as Augustus. He reigned between 27 BC and AD 14. According to PBS, this was the first political lie. So I'd like to read that to you. Rome was on the point of collapse. For decades, a civil war had divided the city into two camps, the old Roman family Republicans and the monarchists who wanted a powerful king to rule. Augustus came from the monarch's camp, but in order to unite the city behind him, he knew he had to change his image. Augustus reinvented himself through the use of art. His sculptors came up with an image that was far more humble, a sort of man of the people image, and it allowed him to unite the two camps of Rome. But it was all a lie. He had duped the citizen of Rome. In reality, Augustus founded a system of dictatorship that would last for over 400 years. So interesting that art was so powerful that you could change an image. And of course, with the size of an empire that big, there's really no way that people, say, in France would ever meet the emperor rather. So what did the emperor do? He sent out decrees, or he sent out coins or sculptures and had them erected all over the empire. And if his sculpture looked like he was humble, it looked like he was strong, it looked like he was magnanimous, then he would be a much more popular ruler than what anybody would really know had they lived perhaps closer to Rome. After a 500 year or so reign, the Roman Empire began its decline. From its changing character to its suspect rulers, to invasions of the outsiders or the barbarians who came in sometimes and intermarried and changed from the inside and sometimes attacked from the outside, particularly the Germanic tribes and the Huns, to the rise of the Eastern Empire, the high taxation, the famine and disease that was occurring within the Roman Empire. The last Roman emperor to step down after giving his powers to the East stepped down in 476 AD. And at that time, the Christian church that had been rising since the birth of Christ, particularly about 200 years after, with the spread of its ideas through Paul, was ready to take over and to unify Europe once again.